I have no direction or goals in my life at the moment. What can I do to regain my compass in life?
Well, you talked about that a little bit in your intro. So there's this line in the New Testament, which is kind of mysterious, you might say. But it's really an instruction set. And the line is approximately, knock and the door will open, ask and you will receive, seek and you will find. And you think, well, no way, that can't possibly be true. But it's true if all of that is undertaken seriously. So one of the things that Tammy and I learned to do when we were trying to adjudicate our arguments, and we both tried to abide by that, was like, if I'm upset with her, let's say, it's clearly because she's done something wrong. One of the things that I'm required to do is let her know what my conditions for satisfaction are. It's like, what do I want? And I have to be able to tell her. And I might object, well, if you loved me, dear, you'd know what I want. And people say that to each other all the time, and they should immediately get slapped for that. It's just like, I'm too stupid to know what I want, let alone figure out what you want. You don't even know what you want. So it's good to kind of clue your partner in. Here's what I would, now that doesn't mean once you let the person know that they're necessarily going to deliver it, but they might, especially if you also allow them the luxury of doing it stupidly and badly, at least to begin with. You know, your wife might tell you, when I put some effort into getting ready to go out, I'd like you to say something nice. It's still a bit vague. It's like, okay, dear, exactly what would you like me to say? Well, that's an annoying thing for your wife to have to think through, and it's annoying for you maybe to have to mouth those words, but, you could do it stupid and badly 20 times and maybe get a little expert at it, and by the 100th time, you're like world expert at compliment deliverer, and you can encourage her to pursue her interest in attire, let's say, and why isn't that a good thing for both of you? And so, but that's all dependent on whether or not you're willing to let yourself know what you want. And that's all dependent on whether or not you're willing to ask. And so one of the things you can ask yourself, and this is very useful, is what would your life have to look like in order for it to justify itself to you? And so why would I put it that way? Well, your life is hard. It's full of suffering. It's full of malevolence, for that matter. It's full of malevolent suffering. That's coming for sure. And that's a heavy burden to bear. And you might say, well, it's so heavy that nothing at all could possibly justify it. And I think that's not a productive attitude. I think if you watch your life, you see that there are things that will grip you that do appear to justify the weight of existence. And I think you can commune with yourself, which is a form of thought. It's a form of meditative prayer, but that's a form of thought. And the thought is, what do I want? If I could have what I wanted and needed, what would that look like? You don't know where you're going or why, the person who asked this question. So let's decompose the problem a little bit. I don't know what to do with my life. Well, that's a pretty vague problem, because your life that's a big, complex, multidimensional thing, and the probability that you're going to be able to formulate an answer to the question, what's the meaning of my life, is pretty much zero. Because, well, what do you want, a one-sentence answer? Like, it's a one-sentence question. You think there's a one-sentence answer? That's not helpful. And so what I often did practically in my clinical practice, and this is useful to know, especially if you're a bit lost, is, well, where do people generally derive their sense of meaning? And it's not that complicated to figure that out. And this is also a conservative perspective in some sense. Well, most people need or want an intimate relationship and some family interaction. maybe that's children, maybe it's with your parents or your siblings, but zero family interaction is generally not part of the optimized human condition. Most of us would like to have a friend or two. We need a job or a career to keep body and soul together, but also so that we're in harness and we can pull against a weight that in a noble and productive and generous manner. We perhaps need to be engaged in something creatively. We have to take care of ourselves mentally and physically. We should adopt some civic responsibility. We need to protect ourselves against major sources of hedonistic and impulsive temptation. There's 8 things. It's like, well, pursue one of them. Start there. You know, when I dealt with my clients who were depressed, unhappy, let's say, the first thing I would do with them is walk them through that analytic process. It's like, do you have anything in place in any of these domains? Sometimes I had people who were doing pretty good in all 8 areas and were still unhappy. Those people were depressed, technically, right? Because their lives were actually in pretty good order, but they were miserable. There was something wrong with them. They were ill in some way that was lowering their mood, destroying their positive emotion. Other people would be batting 0 on all 8 fronts. Like, they weren't depressed, they just had terrible lives. And so, really, and so what I would do with those people is, well, look, like, here's 8 things that aren't in place in your life. It's no bloody wonder you're miserable and everything seems meaningless except for the suffering, because that's a meaning too. It's like, why don't we start working incrementally in a few of these areas, and then we can just evaluate and see if that's helpful. And it's almost invariably helpful, you know. And part of that is, well, specify. You ask yourself, well, what do I need that I don't have? Well, maybe I'd like to have a partner. Okay, well, I can't just leap from not having a partner to being happily married in one fell swoop. There's intervening steps. One of the things I used to do with my clients who were lonesome is say, well, look, have you tried online dating? No, I'm too afraid. It's like, well, no wonder you're afraid of it. You have your reasons. But we could start small. It's like, why don't you write out a dating profile? Don't post it. Just go online one of these sites and write out a profile. Who are you? What do you have to offer? And what do you want? Think it through. Write it out. Come up with a coherent story about a coherent representation about who you are, and then figure out what you want. And then maybe when you develop that in a manner that feels solid to you and reliable and genuine, and you've also developed a vision of the person that you're trying to attract, that would help you feel confident in your happiness. If you actually met that person, well, then you're ready to go. Launch it on the site and talk to the person. You know, first maybe it's just text, and then maybe it's coffee, and you know, there's incremental ways of doing this, and you can do that with all of those 8 domains. It's like, get yourself a life. Solzhenitsyn said, for example, that one man who stops lying can bring down a tyranny. And he did that, so he knew. And he wasn't the only person who did that, but we each bear ultimate responsibility in some sense for the direction of our mutual striving forward. I think that's the core doctrine of the West, you know, that each individual is sovereign and of divine and ultimate worth. And there's a commensurate responsibility with that. And so I thought, when I realized that, partly from reading Solzhenitsyn, partly from reading Jung, partly from reading Dostoevsky, Frankl, many people were pointing in that direction. Nietzsche, to some degree, that it was necessary for us to become aware of that and to take that responsibility on our own shoulders. And so I've been talking to people as individuals ever since, at McGill, at Harvard, at the University of Toronto, and then more broadly publicly
inviting people to the adventure of their life, let's say, the moral adventure of their life, driven by my conviction that it actually matters whether you get your act together. Like it matters eternally in some sense. It matters in a heaven or hell manner. You know, in a totalitarian state, people are locked into tyranny because every individual lies. Every single one. And that's the grip of the totalitarian state. And to the degree that you are living in deceit, let's say, you're contributing to tyranny and the hell that accompanies it. And not in some little way. Not only are you not saying what you should say when you should say it, but you're not doing what needs to be done when you need to do it. You're turning a blind eye and allowing it to happen, but you're also not bringing into the world what you could bring into the world if you brought everything you could into the world. And that lack on your part of bringing into the world what could be there if you would reveal your light, let's say, that's cataclysmic. And that's a painful realization. But it goes along with being a locus of divine worth. And so, I believe that. I believe that if you fail to say what you know to be true, you corrupt the world. You corrupt being. If you lie, you corrupt being. Corrupted being is hell. And if we all lie enough, then we have hell. And whether we all lie enough to bring about hell is actually dependent in much larger part than it's what would you say? It's that you might desire to admit. It's dependent on your choice. And so one of the reasons we love doing what we're doing, I would say, is because we come to these events with thousands of people, and everybody at the event is there because they're trying to aim up. And often doing so, especially in contrast to their previous efforts. And that's unbelievably motivating and wonderful to see, but also necessary. We are very powerful now, all of us, with our incredible technological gadgets, our computational power, and that's going to get way more, we're going to get way more powerful than that really fast. And so you better get your act together, because children can't wield that sort of power without all hell breaking loose. And so I'm very optimistic, because things could be maybe better than we could even imagine. But if we want to, we could sure make them worse. So we all have to decide, are we aiming up with all we got? Or are we aiming down? So, and I hope that whatever we're doing tonight is a contribution to the consensus that we should each do what we can in the confines of our own life, in the unlimited expanse of the opportunity of our own lives to aim up. And if we all do that carefully enough, then up we'll go. There's a gospel statement, something very harsh that's been attributed to Christ. Don't cast pearls before swine. It's a rough statement. And what it means is stop talking to people who aren't listening. It might be that you have someone in your family you can't reconcile with, because when you try to make peace, you're just rebuffed. And you can try multiple times and be rebuffed, and that might be a reflection of your lack of skill, and to some degree probably is, but sometimes you're talking to someone who is pursuing that misery. And until they're willing to not do that, you may not be able to communicate with them. But then part of that reconciliation process with your father would also be the development of the ability to distinguish between people or situations that you can address productively and those you can't. And those you can't, you have to just let go, and not push.
And listen.
And listen. Yeah, right, because people will tell you. Yeah, well, that's true. That's a good point too. I mean, if you keep talking to someone and they're not listening, and you stop talking, sometimes you can stop talking and just listen. And then if you listen hard enough, they'll tell you what their problem is. And that's really worth knowing too. So if you have a family member who you can't communicate with and you keep trying to make your point and it's not working, it's like, quit trying to make your point. It's not working. Why? You're not talking to who you think you're talking to. They're not hearing what you think you're saying. You're not where you think you are. So then you think, okay, where am I? And the answer is, well, you don't know. You've got to start to explore. How do you find out where you are? Listen to them. Don't offer them your opinion at all if it's not working. Just listen. They will eventually tell you what they're up to. And not only will they tell you what they're up to, they'll tell you how you could fix it. And that's really something to watch when you see it happen. So that's a good rule of thumb. You try 3 times to reconcile yourself to someone, with someone, you just hit a wall. It's like, quit talking. Quit talking. Listen harder. If that isn't working, listen even harder. They'll reveal themselves, and then you'll be able to figure out what to do. And that's, again, assuming that they're not aiming down. And now and then you run into someone who's aiming down hard, and you just have to let them hit whatever they're aiming at hard enough to either kill them or wake them up. And often there's not much you can do about that except try to be a good example and to be available if they do need to reach out. So imagine you got 6 or 7 people in your family you want to reconcile with. You can try it with a couple of them. If you're making some progress, good, you can walk down that path. If you're being rebuffed, it's like, well, that's not a door that's open to you at the moment. So yeah, the promise is that you can atone for your past sins by confession and the genuine determination to do better in the future, right? And hopefully that's true, because otherwise when you make a mistake, you're lost and there's no way forward. And the best way forward is to figure out what you brought to the table. That's at least somewhat under your control.
Misery is the default human condition in the absence of sustaining meaning, just like hunger is the default condition in the absence of food. And you need productive engagement, productive, generous, reciprocal engagement in order to provide you with the genuine meaning that sustains you in life. And the pathway, a lot of the pathway to that is pretty pragmatic and practical. You got no friends? That's likely a problem. You're a creative person, you have no creative outlet? That's not going to work out for you. No, you're lonesome because you don't have an intimate relationship? That's a source of pain. Those things have to be rectified, and you can do that incrementally, and that works. So that's a practical pathway to incremental improvement. And one of the things that's cool about that, because you might be thinking, oh my God, this is hopeless. I don't have any of those 8 things. I might as well just end it all tonight. It's like, and people certainly think that, and I'm not making light of it. One of the things that's very much worth knowing is that a lot of positive emotion is dependent technically on the observation, on your personal observation that you're moving towards a valued goal. See, not that you've attained the goal. So imagine that you're in your hopeless situation and you decide, well, I'm going to work on the relationship front. So now you develop a vision of what a relationship might be like, and you posit that as a promised land, let's say, and then you differentiate that so you can make incremental steps forward, and the incremental steps are small enough so that you actually take them. As soon as you start to take them and you observe yourself moving forward in relationship to that goal, then first of all, you'll be stabilized on the anxiety front, because now you have a purpose that's finite and defined. And second, you have positive emotion, because you experience positive emotion in relationship to observing yourself move towards a valued goal. So right away, you don't have to attain the goal in order to be meaningfully engaged. You just have to be on the pathway forward. And so you can benefit from this almost immediately. And if you want to do something practical, I have a program online at selfauthoring.com called Future Authoring that helps people develop a vision on these 8 different dimensions, along these 8 different dimensions that I just outlined. And you could go and do that, do it badly, because you're not going to get it perfect anyways, and then get humble enough to make the incremental steps small enough so someone as useless as you might actually do them, and then away you go. And that works out. We used this program, for example, we had students in 3 universities, but I'll talk about one, vocational college in Canada. We had all the students who were going to this vocational college. We divided them into 2 groups. They either wrote for 90 minutes about what they had done in the last 2 weeks in their life, or they wrote for 90 minutes about their vision across these dimensions that I described. They didn't have any training, no warning, except that they knew they were going to participate in the study, and no one even reviewed what they wrote. And we dropped the dropout rate of those students by 50% in the first year. All they needed was a compelling vision, and that's what we all need. We all need a compelling vision. We're visionary creatures in the literal sense. We need a compelling vision, and one of the things our society does very badly is to encourage people, is to let people know that they are visionaries, and to encourage them to develop for themselves a compelling vision. It's very sad that we don't do that, especially because if you do that with people, the results are spectacular and immediate. And one of the things that's been heart-rending, I would say, for both of us, going around the world talking to people, is people frequently stop me on the street and say, the story is in some sense archetypal, although the details vary in interesting ways. I wasn't in a very good place. I was suffering, and there's usually reasons for that. And then I listened to your lectures, which of course are predicated on the observations of brilliant clinicians and psychologists, and so the ideas aren't attributable to me. They're just great ideas. I listened to your lectures, and I started developing a vision and attempting to put my life together, and things are way better. It's like, what's so sad about it's very pleasing to hear that in one sense, because the upside of the story is the improvement, right? The movement away from the catastrophe. But the downside of the story is twofold. First of all, the catastrophe was there to begin with. And second, it didn't take much encouragement to fix it, which brings the question right up to the forefront. Why the hell wasn't that encouragement there to begin with? Why are so many people dying on the vine for lack of an encouraging word? Because it's definitely the case. That pertains to the mental health of young people. And it's in no small part because we do everything we can to punish the spirit out of young people. We especially do that with boys. But we're pretty good at, you can't do that to boys without doing it to girls too in the final analysis, because we're basically stuck with each other. So develop a compelling vision, and one that you're the one who judges whether or not it's compelling. You want to formulate a vision such that you apprehend the vision, you think, oh my God, if I could have that, life would be worth living. Well, yeah, that's what you want. And you might find that you're actually not that hard to satisfy. That that what would satisfy you, fill you with hope, stabilize you psychologically, is actually within your grasp. And certainly my experience on the clinical front was that was the case. One of the things I loved about being a clinician, I really loved this, was that generally my clients who were genuinely aiming up, because not all of them were, but most of them were, the ones who were genuinely aiming up made rapid progress. And it was extremely engaging and entertaining to work with them on that. We'd set goals. I want to triple my salary in 3 years. That was fun. It's like, okay, that sounds like a war. How might you do that? And it was extraordinarily entertaining to plot that out, to strategize about it like it was a full-fledged war, but a war for something positive, and a war that would benefit the person who won and also the people around them. And that's well within your grasp. There's any number of things that are right in front of you that you could radically improve with the right vision, and that would result in radical improvement, and not just for you, but for everybody around you. That's just right there in front of everyone. And it's particularly true if what's around you is pretty dismal, because if what's around you is pretty dismal, there's just no shortage of opportunity for improvement. Might be difficult, but man, there's lots of possibilities sitting there as well. So aim up, get a vision, man, and pursue it. And the more of us that do that, the better things are going to be. And it would be better if they were better than if they were worse. And we're certainly trying to sort that out on the cultural front at the moment. It's like, let's aim up, because down is a very deep hole. And maybe we don't want to blunder into that again.
If there's something you want, you need about 5 arguments about why you want it. Because the probability that the person who's opposing you will have 5 arguments about why you shouldn't have it is very low. They just won't have thought it through enough. So the other thing that happens in the future authoring exercise is that you're asked to articulate the reasons for all the goals that come out of your vision of the future. So you're asked, like, why would it be good for you? Why would it be good for your family? Why would it be good for broader society? And so that gives you 3 levels of argumentation right there. And if you have it articulated down into detail and it's related to other important goals, then you're a hell of a thing to argue with, because people just aren't that deep, by which I mean they just don't have that many levels of explanation or objection. And it's also really useful in relationship to your own mind, because if you want to do something that's difficult and that requires energy, a lot of different subsystems in your mind are going to throw up objections. It's like, well, maybe that isn't what you should be doing right now. Maybe you should be doing the dishes or vacuuming or watching TV or looking at YouTube. Or if you're really sneaky, when you're trying to do something hard, what your brain does is give you something else hard to do that's not quite as hard, so that you can feel justified in not doing the thing you're supposed to because you're doing something else useful. And if you give in to that temptation, which you often will, then it wins, and because it wins, it gets a little dopamine kick and it grows stronger. Anything you let win, the internal argument, grows. And anything you let be defeated shrinks, because it's punished. It doesn't get to have its way. So that's another thing really to remember, is don't practice what you do not want to become. And because they're neurological circuits, you build those things in there, man, they're not going anywhere. You can build another little machine to inhibit them. That's the best you can do. Once they're in there, you can't get them out. So, and then the ones you build to inhibit can be taken out by stress, and the old habits will come back up. So you got to be careful what you say and what you do, because you build yourself that way.
Well, you become what you practice. And so if you're high in neuroticism, it's going to take a lot of practice to get you all calmed down. But that's what you do in psychotherapy with people all the time, because a large number of people who are in therapy have higher than average levels of negative emotion, and you help them become stronger. And the way you do that is by strategizing with them and encouraging them to confront the things that they're afraid of and avoiding, and they become more able and more courageous as a consequence of doing so. And you can shift people quite a lot doing that. And that's what you do when you learn, and that's how you teach kids. And it's the universal mechanism of adaptation. And you try to speed that up in psychotherapy, and you can do that for yourself, you know. Like, this is a really useful, what would you call it, ritual, routine. So, look, you've got a goal, and you'll see that as you progress towards the goal, there'll be obstacles that emerge, and some of them you don't want to confront. You're going to shy away from them, you know. So maybe I have a client and they're being tyrannized at work and they need to get another job, and to do that they have to put their CV in order, and they're embarrassed about their CV, and they don't even want to open the file on their computer that contains their CV, which they haven't looked at for 10 years and which contains nothing but a record of their dismal failures in the past as far as they're concerned. And that's a box that's locked, that's Pandora's box with a dragon in it, and they don't want to go anywhere near it. And no wonder, you know. But if they're going to get another job, well, unless they get their resume together, they're stuck under the thumb of their local tyrant, and that's not a good deal. And so often what you do with someone like that is you say, just print your resume. Don't even look at the bloody thing. Just print it, turn it upside down, put it in an envelope, and bring it to the session the next week. And then the person will come back and say, you know, that task that we agreed on, because you have to agree on these things, I didn't do it. I couldn't even sit at the computer. And so then you say, well, do you think this week you could just sit at the computer and think about opening your resume? And they might say, yes. And then they come back the next week and said, you know, I didn't even sit at the computer and think about my resume. And then you walk the person through turning on their computer and then opening up the dread folder and then reading the title of the horrible dragon resume, and then maybe opening it. And then you say, that's good enough for this week. And then maybe the person can go home and just open their damn resume. And then maybe they can print it out and bring it to you. And then maybe you can go through the sub-reptiles one by one, you know, and clean out the snakes. It's like, well, what were you doing between 2011 and 2013? And the answer is, that is the last thing that I want to discuss with anyone, right? So there's a lacuna, there's a hole in the account, in the autobiographical account, and chaos itself is looking through that with all that disorder and shame and malevolence lurking in the background, and no one wants to look at that. You think, well, you didn't do a very good job between 2012 and 2013, and you've got a hole in your record, and we need to do something about that now. And so, you know, how do we address that so that you have a coherent account of yourself? And look, this could take a good while, right, to put that all back together. That's your whole past, to put that together in a manner that you could confidently bring forward to a new potential employer. But it's worth it if you escape from tyranny and you now have a coherent account of yourself, and you've atoned for your past inadequacies, let's say, and you're ready to move forward. And partly what you do in therapy, and partly what you should do with yourself, is not hide all that in the fog, you know, so you know where you are, so you can figure out where you're going, and then practice doing that. And then as you practice doing that, then that's what you become, and that will lower your proclivity to negative emotion, definitely, as you put your life together. That's why it's useful to order your room. Chaotic room makes you anxious. Why? Too many pathways, man. You walk into someone's room and you think, what the hell is going on here? Maybe that's your teenager's bedroom. And you've pretty much summed it up in the question. It's like, yeah, it's a little slice of hell in that room, you know? And how do you feel when you're there? Like you'd rather be anywhere else. And no wonder, because everything in the room is broadcasting chaos and disorder at you. So that's another thing I used to do with my clients, typical behavioral maneuver, which is, if you're anxious, organize your surroundings a bit. You know, simplify, declutter, organize bit by bit. Order, habitable order, the habitable order that is good. All of that. It's a recreation of the original Eden.
metaphysically speaking. And you can do that very practically, and then you practice that, and that'll sort you out.
You have to be tough as a damn boot to be good, because you have to stand your ground when you need to stand your ground, and you have to be able to say no when it's time to say no, and you have to mean it. And so then you have to think and plan strategically so that when you're going to say no, you can mean it and it will stick. You know, and that takes a certain amount of integrated malevolence, I would say. And once it's integrated, it's not malevolence, it's strength. It's strength of character. It's the ability to stand your ground. And you have to cultivate that. And you cultivate that at least in part by telling the truth. And so you take your place in the world as a decent person and as a decent citizen, and you play the hierarchical game properly. And that is to stand up straight with your shoulders back. It's like the world's an onslaught. You've got the tyranny of culture to deal with. You've got the catastrophe of nature. You've got your own damn malevolence and ignorance, right? All coming at you. Plus the incredible, complicated, indeterminate potential of the future. That's all coming at you. And it's all your responsibility. And you can cringe away from it and be afraid of it and be victimized by it and be bitter and cynical about it. And no wonder, because it can be painful. Or you can turn around and you can say, man, bring it on. Because there's more to me than there is to the catastrophe. And this is what I discovered from looking at what I looked at. I looked at the darkest things I could look at, really for 30 years. I was really a lot of fun to be around, I can tell you. I looked at the darkest things that I could think of, right? Not only what happened in Auschwitz and what happened in the Gulag, but personal issues. You know, it's like I wasn't so much interested in the totalitarians as a group. I was interested in the people who undertook the terrible acts that the totalitarians required. You know, the people who, I was just rereading Ordinary Men, and it was a story about a police battalion in Poland that trained ordinary policemen to take naked pregnant women out into the fields and shoot them in the back of the head. It takes a lot of training, by the way, before you can bring yourself to do that. And you aren't the same person by the end of it. It's pretty goddamn horrific. You know, and I was trying to figure out, what would it be like to be that person? Because we are that person. And then what would it be like to not be that person? Right? To refuse to do that, to not participate in that. You know, and what I discovered by making that totalitarian proclivity personal was that there's more to us than there is to the horror. As nature is, bent on our destruction, bad as culture is, tyrannical and bloody back as far as you can look, as malevolent as you are in the darkest part of your heart, and that's plenty malevolent. The possibility that's within you that can well up, the courage and the truth and the ability and the skill and the willingness to set things right, if you are willing to set them right, is more powerful than all of that. And so it's so interesting. It was proof for me of an old saying I read from Carl Jung. It's an alchemical motif, in stir qualinus inventur, which is what you most want to be found will be found where you least want to look, essentially. And it's so interesting because it means that if you're willing to turn around and to stand up straight and face the darkness like fully, what you discover at the darkest part is the brightest light. And that's something that's so much worth discovering, because there's going to be terrible darkness in your life. And it's going to make you cynical and bitter. And it could easily be that you're just not looking at it enough. Because if you looked at it enough and you didn't shy away and you brought everything you had to bear on it, you'd find that there was more to you than there was to the horror. I have people writing to me from all over the world who are saying they're doing that. They're saying, well, you know, I cleaned up my room and then I stopped saying stupid things, and my God, it's like things are way better. It's like, who would have guessed it? You know? And so it's low-hanging fruit, man. Because that's the other thing. If there's a lot of things wrong with you, then it's really easy to start fixing it, you know? There's so much territory that you can inhabit. I will make of thee a great nation. I will bless thee. That's good. I mean, the whole nation thing, that's positive, but to have God on your side, that's, you know, you might want that when things get rough. That would be good. And make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Wonderful. That's a good deal. And I will bless them that bless thee. That's good too. And curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. That's something. That's something. Wouldn't it be something if you could wake up and your day was composed in part of people thanking you for all the good things you've done in the world? Wouldn't that be good? It's not impossible for that to happen. So Abram departed. Yes, as the Lord had spoken unto him. And Lot went with him. And Abram was 70 and 5 years when he departed out of Haran. That's old. Now Abraham lives a long time, but this is also part of the story. So he has a wife who can't have children. He has nothing. Obviously, he's been hanging around Dad's shack for a little too long, given that he's 75, right? It's time to get a fire lit underneath him a bit. And so he's not got much going for him, but he still decides to move forward. And I've seen this too, you know, like if you don't have your destiny in hand by your time you're 30, it's rough. You start hurting. And if you don't have your destiny in hand by the time you're 40, then you really start hurting. And 40 is a real fork in the road. The fork in the road, that's always where you meet the devil, by the way. And that's because every time you have to make a decision, the possibility of evil beckons. That's why that is. I had a friend, I've told you a little about him, and he killed himself just after 40. He had had a book published with a very small press. He was quite a good writer, but he could not get himself together, and it hit him too hard at 40. And I'm not saying that it's hopeless at 40. I'm not saying that, and I'm not saying that partly because of these verses, but also partly because of what I've seen in my clinical practice. I've had people come to me who have had very chaotic and ill-spent lives, let's say, who were in that neighborhood of age, and it's true for people who are older as well, who then decided to make a real effort and to try to make where they were better, you know, instead of being bitter about where they weren't, because that's the bitterness that really does you in. It's really not good. It's the opposite of gratitude. It's the manifestation of resentment. It makes you malevolent. It's very, very bad to be bitter. It's hell to be bitter. And if you're 40 and you're not successful, then you have to accept your lot, and you have to start to improve what's right in front of you. And if you do that, it doesn't take very long. It's quite interesting to watch people. Things can be a lot better in 6 months, and they can be way better in 2 years. Like, it's a struggle, uphill struggle, but it's by no means impossible. And I don't know, again, what the limit of that is. I suppose it depends to some degree on the degree of your commitment. But anyway, so it's another indication of the real validity of this story. God isn't setting this up to be easy, right? Abraham's old, and his wife is old too, and more than that, she's barren. How is he going to be the father of nations? How is he going to be successful? Well, the initial departure point is insufficient, radically insufficient. And that's very inspiring, because it means that you can start from where you are. And it's worth asking yourself. It's like, drop what you're doing that's foolish, that you know is foolish, and pick an aim that's worthwhile, you know, to make things better for yourself, like you're worth taking care of, like you're worth something, you know, and to surround yourself with people who believe the same, and who are rejoicing in your accomplishments and unhappy when you fail, right? And you're comparing yourself to your accomplishments of yesterday and not to someone else's today, so that you're not jealous and bitter. And you put your own house in order so that you're not cursing the world when some of its disarray might be your fault. And you're trying to pursue something meaningful, and you're doing your best to tell the truth, and all of that. And then you see what happens. Who the hell are you? You know, you think you're a miracle of some bloody bizarre sort. We've been around for 3.5 billion years. You know, every single one of your relatives propagated successfully. And here you are, against all possible odds, in this world of hell in some sense, and bitterness and tyranny and malevolence. And yet God only knows what's inside you, this capacity for consciousness, the capacity to confront potential and to turn it into something good. That's us, man. That's the Western story. That's the individual as the cornerstone of the state. That's our responsibility, and it really is who we are. Well, he thought that your sense of meaning, roughly speaking, you can think meaning is kind of like that which attracts your attention, we'll say, just for the sake of simplicity. If you're careful and you haven't filled your head up with garbage, which means you don't lie to yourself, so that's like step one. You can't lie to yourself because that screws up your brain and then you can't trust it. So we'll just say you're not doing that, or you're trying not to do that. Then your brain orients you to this and that. It says, wow, isn't that interesting? And you don't have much control over that. Your brain just does that. Wow, that's interesting. And you might think, why do I think that's interesting? But you don't know. And so that begs the question, who does know if it's not you? Who's in control in there? Well, Jung's answer was, he called it a mechanism called the self, which was the sort of superordinate you that was superordinate to your ego, and it told you what to be interested in. And what it told you to be interested in was any manifestation of any circumstance that looked like it might be aligned with winning the metagame. So not only can you detect the environment in a sense, which isn't what you think it is, it's more like known and unknown, something like that, at a very high level of abstraction. You can also detect when these invisible elements that you can't see line up properly. And your brain will orient towards that. You think, wow, that's meaningful. Wow, that's fascinating. Isn't there something cool about that? Don't I love investigating that and being in that state of mind? And the answer to that, yes, you do love it. Why? Well, it's not because you're going to get more like Lexuses or Lexi maybe? Lexuses, if you do that, although maybe that'll be one of the things that happen. It's because your brain is trying to tell you that if you pay attention to that and you're diligent in its pursuit, it's like Mercurius, the Mercurius of the alchemists who would lead you to the gold. If you're diligent in your pursuit of that, then everything lines up for you. And even better, maybe everything lines up for everyone else. And then everyone gets what they want. Or maybe it's even better than that, because who cares what you want? Maybe what happens if you're very diligent about that and you're open to the possibility, you're not manipulating the damn world all the time, but trying to find out where the Tao flows and being part of that, maybe what happens is you get what's best for you, whatever that is. And at the same time, while you're making the world best for you, and that doesn't mean you just get what you want, because you're too dumb to figure out what's best for you, and who cares what you want. We're going to assume what's best for you, and then maybe it's even better than that, because we are so deeply social that there's a place where what's best for you is simultaneously best for everyone else too, over long frames of time. And you have an inkling of that, you have a vision of it. And that's the vision of utopia or the kingdom of heaven or any of these things. And this is such a vision. One of the things it says is, the exploratory hero eternally rules over the kingdom of heaven. It's like, yes, that's right. It's not a metaphor. It's not a metaphor. It's more like a category. And a category and a metaphor aren't the same thing. So there's the frame, and it's a story in a sense. Or a game, and it might be a story because you might say, well, I was at point A and then I went to point B and here's how I got there. It's not necessarily a very interesting story, but it's sort of like the basic unit of story. And then it's also a game, like a Monopoly game. So what's the point of a Monopoly game? Well, that's hard to say, actually. It depends on your level of analysis, but you could say, well, it's a zero-sum game. You have to get all the money and all the property, and then you win. So winning is one point, but then, well, that's the competitive element of it. But then there's a cooperative element, which is, well, look, you're all playing Monopoly, so you've all decided that the goal is to get all the money. It's a little collective decision. It's a weird one. I mean, why do you care? Well, you do care once you decide that you care, and that's interesting because one of the things that demonstrates is that you can sort of decide what you're going to care about. And I think that's part of the human capacity for abstraction, is that we have these underlying biological systems that in some sense have set motivational content. So if you're deprived of H2O, then you're going to crave and seek water, and that's built into you. But our cortical structures, which emerged out of these lower, more primordial systems and are still structured deeply by them, can substitute abstractions for those more concrete, basic states of desire and goals. And so it's almost as if we can put anything into the goal box, and then we act as if it's important. And that's really part of our capacity for fiction. It's part of our capacity for creativity. It's part of our capacity for storytelling and for imagination and all of these things. And our capacity for abstraction is built on a lower platform that's more primordial, but it still partakes of all the elements of the primordial subsystems because we're constrained by our evolutionary development. Now, then the question might be, well, if you're an aiming sort of person, what should you aim at? That's the question. What should you aim at? And we already hypothesized that you shouldn't aim at winning. You should aim at playing the game properly. But now we don't know what that means. So we're going to figure out what that means. So the first thing you might imagine is that there's the game, Monopoly. You aim at winning, maybe. Maybe you aim at winning. You don't want to aim at winning too hard because then people don't like playing with you and you get all whiny and you act like you're 3 years old when you get this chance card that says you have to pay $50 on each hotel, and you put all that work into getting all those hotels, and that just shows you whose side God is really on. And people react more like that than you'd think, and when they react like they're cursed by God when they get the wrong chance card, that's worth noting, which is part of the reason you're playing the game too, because you want to figure out who thinks they're cursed by God, and that's a really easy way to do it. Hopefully you also want to have fun while you're playing the game, and there's all sorts of different levels of that. And so you can see that Monopoly is actually a very complicated thing, even though it's simple. And it's also completely bizarre, right, that people will get their emotions all tangled up in that game, even though everyone notices right off the bat that who really cares who has the most plastic hotels. So, but it just shows you how right the Buddhists are, right? Because you can tangle yourself up in a Monopoly game badly enough to lose friendships if you really want to. So that's pretty interesting that people are like that. So anyways, but here's something to think about. So let's say you got a friend and you play Monopoly with them, and that's one thing, and maybe you want to win, but maybe you really like playing Monopoly, just for the sake of argument. And so you don't want to win so badly that you don't ever get to play Monopoly again. And that's a constraint. And so here's a constraint. It's good to play games. It's better to play games than it is to win them. Or it's certainly better to play games than it is to win one game. So then you might ask yourself, well, what exactly is the formal relationship between winning a game or any number of games and being invited to play the maximum number of games? Well, that's a tough question. Then you might ask yourself, well, who's the winner? The person who wins a game, or 5 games, or 10 games, or the person who gets invited to play the largest number of games? And the answer to that is, well, it's the person who gets invited to play the largest number of games. And obviously. And what that means even is that you could lose 70% of the time, let's say, in any game you ever play, and still come out ahead if you get invited to play enough games. Because if you win 30% of the games that you play, and you play an unbelievably large number of high quality games, it's like, not only do you rake in the consequences of that, but everyone's thrilled to play with you because they win a bit more than you do every time you play. So then you might ask, well, what do you mean by win? And that's exactly the same question as, well, what do you mean by, what are you aiming at? So, there's the game, and then there's the game of games. And the game of games is more important than the game, because the game is a subset of the set of games, of the game of games. And the moral rule is, never win the game in such a way that makes you a loser at the game of games. And that's what you're telling your child when you say, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game. And that actually turns out to be right.
And I had another client who could be lucid in her dreams, which is more common among women. She could ask the damn characters what they represented and they would tell her. It was like, okay, that was pretty weird. And like a lot of the things they told her were really helpful, and they were not things that she wanted to hear. She basically, one of them told her if she was going to live, she'd have to go visit a slaughterhouse. And the reason for that was because she was raised as a little princess and protected from horrible Mother Nature until she hit puberty, in which time she turned into an evil villain, because that's how the family worked. Perfect child, evil teenager, overnight. And then, well, that was hard on her, and she wasn't prepared because she thought the world was princess world, and, you know, she couldn't go through a butcher store without having a fit. And no wonder, you know, like, really, Jesus, you know, it's no wonder, but you do it. But she couldn't, so we used to go to butcher stores, and that would make her cry, and that she was a vegetarian, that would make her cry, and, you know, bemoan the cruelty of the world. And it's like, yeah, fair enough, man, those are bloody slabs of meat. It's like, I don't know why everyone isn't screaming when they walk through the butcher store, but you got to get used to it, man, because you can't live in the world otherwise. And so the dream character, who was a gypsy, told her that she had to go visit a slaughterhouse, which seemed rather impractical. And so I asked her if she could think of anything else to do, and she thought, well, why don't we go visit a funeral home and watch an embalming? And I thought, oh, good, that sounds like a fun way to spend a day. And so I phoned up a funeral parlor, and I said I had a client who was terrified of death. Yeah, and I was a therapist who was also a little shaky on the concept myself. And so they had no problem with that. They deal with death all the time, which is really something to think about, right? A human being can actually have an occupation where they do nothing but deal with death, and they don't go stark raving mad. It's like, what the hell's up with that? It's like working in a palliative care ward where your clients that you know have a relationship, all they're going to do is die this week, next week, the week after. People do that. It's like, those people are tough, man. They're tough. So anyways, we went and watched this embalming, which was, I have a rather high level of disgust sensitivity, so it was a little on the rough side for me. But she sat there, and first, well, she was not, we were outside this little room, she was not looking at that, man, no way. And she'd kind of go like this, and, you know, that was pretty good. And then she'd go like this, and then she'd go like this, and then she watched it. And then she asked if she could go in, and she put on a glove and she touched the body, and she didn't have a fit, she didn't have a panic attack. And so she walked away from there learning that there was a hell of a lot more to her than she thought there was, and that she could see things that she didn't think she could see and live. And after that, she sort of had a touchstone. It's like, well, I'm kind of afraid of this. Well, is it as bad as going to see the embalming? No, it's not that bad. Well, I guess I can do it. It's like an initiation, right? She had an initiation. And so did I, you know, and I learned a lot from doing that. I learned that one of the things you need to do if you're going to be a human being is to prepare yourself to be useful in the face of death. And so when you have a parent that dies, which, you know, shatters people's ideas often, they can't even think about it. If you can't even think about that, man, you've got some thinking to do, because you need to be able to at least think about that, because otherwise you're just going to be a wasteland when it happens. And you never know, you could even have a higher ambition. Maybe you could even be useful when it happens, instead of being part of the heap of destroyed people who also have to be taken care of. You know, and that's brutal. You have to be brutal to be useful.
in the aftermath of your parents' death. You know, you don't get to crumble and fall apart, and no, you have every reason to, so you got to be kind of some tough monster to manage that. But do you want to be useful in the face of tragedy, or do you want to be pathetic?
I've worked in emergency medicine for 11 years, and I've seen a lot of death, yet I'm so afraid of dying. Any advice on how I can be at peace with dying and mortality?
Well, I don't know if anybody's ever really at peace with that. I mean, I think what you can take away, read Socrates' Apology. There's two versions of it. There's Plato's version, and there's, what was his name, Aristophanes? There's another version. Don't think that's right. Anyways, there's two versions of Socrates' Apology. It's very short. It's only a few pages long, 15 pages or something. Read them both. Why? Well, because Socrates puts forward a very interesting proposition, and I don't know really what to make of it. So I asked my parents once if they could take a drug that would return them to being 18 physically, but they had all the wisdom that they'd accrued over the years. They wouldn't lose that if they would do it. And they didn't say yes right away, you know, and I don't know if they ever did tell me what they had decided, but it was interesting to me that they didn't say no right away either, you know. It was interesting that they had to think about it, because you'd think that if you were offered something approximating immortality and health, you'd take it. And maybe you would, but then here's an alternative proposition, and I don't know. It's not like I'm not trying to maintain myself, you know. If I could extract out an extra decade or an extra 20 years keeping myself healthy, that seems like a good thing. Would I want to live 500 years? Whew, that's a long time, man. 1,000 years? I don't know. It's a long time. But the alternative is, you know, truncated existence with death. And that's also not particularly palatable. And so is there a medicament for mortality? Well, but implicit in Socrates' Apology is the following idea. Imagine you lived your life fully. And that would mean that you said what you had to say when you had to say it. You did what you needed to do when you needed to do it, and you availed yourself of every opportunity that came your way, right? So you'd exhaust yourself in the service of your life, let's say. Maybe by the time you were old, you'd have had enough. You know, and you could just let go. And, you know, you do see this with people, is that, and we kind of know this even when we grieve. You know, maybe you have a relative who's 95 and they die, and people are sad, but you say, well, you know, they lived a full life, and the fuller the life, the less, in some ways, the less catastrophic the demise appears to be. And so it might be that if you fully exhausted yourself, that your life would be enough. So I know, you know, people, I mentioned this already, people who are old and they look back on their life, they're often sorrowful and regretful for the things they didn't do, you know, the things they left undone and maybe now can't do. You know, you could imagine those of you who've been parents, maybe have grown kids now, you think, well, if you could have children again, would you? And maybe the answer is yes, but another answer is, well, you know, I had kids already. I already did that. And if you did that well, maybe that's enough. You know, we have grandkids now, and that's not exactly the same as having kids. It's sort of, it's kids light, right? And it's wonderful. But you made a joke about that when you were on stage. You know, you said they have all the advantages of children, grandchildren, with none of the disadvantages. And that's a joke, but everybody laughs because everybody gets that. And it's great to have grandchildren. And like, would we return to our youth and do it again? Well, that's a very difficult question to answer, right? Because you just don't have You can't tell what you decide unless that option was actually available to you. And maybe the answer is yes, and maybe the answer is no, because, been there, done that, on to whatever the next thing is. And so I would say, if you're afraid of death, take a look at how you're living and see if you're all in. And maybe if you're all in enough, that's good enough. I think that's right. And then I think also, if you're all in and death visits, and it's impending, you could say to yourself, I did everything that I was here to do. At least then you're not going to torture yourself with that as you're facing death. That's something too.
Imagine that you're miserable, and then imagine that you're miserable in your marriage. And then you might say, well, are you miserable because you're ill-constituted psychologically, or are you miserable because your relationship isn't what it should be? And the answer is both. And so then you might ask yourself as well, do you think you could be sane for any length of time if you went through your life and you had no intimate relationship, and you had no children and the close family bonds that would entail, and you had no parents or siblings, and you had no friends, and you had no social community whatsoever? Could you still be well integrated psychologically? And the answer to that is clearly no. We know, for example, that you can punish people intensely, even if they're very antisocial, by subjecting them to solitary confinement. And that in itself shows how dependent psychological well-being and sanity is on proper nesting within a hierarchically structured social community. And so then it's probably better to think of both identity and sanity in a rather musical manner. In a great symphony, every note and every phrase has its place within the totality that's defined by the whole of the piece, and every part plays its part in the magnificence of the whole, let's say. And so if you're a popular child, you can play well with others, and that means that you can adopt shared and socially negotiated frameworks of identity. And if you're a well-constituted and popular and desirable adult, in all likelihood you have a long-term intimate relationship. You have children or siblings and parents, and you've established good relations with them, and you keep each other mutually in check and mutually motivated and mutually sane. And then you have friends who are surrounding you, who are contributing to that sanity, and then your family and your friends and your marriage are integrated into a broader community, and maybe you adopt your civic identity in relationship to that broader community, as all of you are doing tonight, merely by attending this event. You've decided that you're going to step outside the narrow confines of your subjectively defined identity and contribute in some manner to the integrity of the whole and all its parts. And then above the local civic community is the level of the state, and then the level of the nation, and then the level of the international order. And all of those have to be in sync and in harmony in some real sense for any individual within that entire hierarchy to be truly sane. How sane do you think you could be in the middle of a war fought between your nation and another nation? And I'm afraid you all might have the opportunity to find out sooner rather than later, although I hope that that's not the case. And so I predicated the Conservative Manifesto on the proposition that what conservatives have to offer young people is a much more comprehensive view of what constitutes identity than this idiot solipsistic claim that you define yourself subjectively like a 2-year-old, and that you can demand that people treat you according to how you feel, whatever that means, in opposition to the identity that you would negotiate as a fair player with other people. And so conservatives can say to young people, look, you want to find meaning in your life. You want to find a meaning that sustains you through catastrophe. You want to be able to be a resilient person. You want to have worthwhile things to do. And you're going to find that primarily in the service that you grant to others and in the responsibility that you voluntarily shoulder. And that's a much different story than you get to be whatever you want moment to moment because of how you feel, and that all constraints placed on your hedonic, short-term, self-satisfaction are to be regarded as nothing but the manifestation of power and tyranny. That's such a demoralizing viewpoint, especially for young people. When you talk to anybody who's a little older and maybe has the wisdom that goes along with age, if they're fortunate, they know perfectly well that the most of the significant and sustaining meaning that they've found in their life is a consequence of truly reciprocal service to others and voluntarily undertaken responsibility. That shouldn't be regarded as a limit in some sense on the quality of your life. People think of marriage as a unnecessary, bureaucratic-ridden, patriarchal arrangement that's nothing but oppression. And they think of children as nothing but excess responsibility, and that's utter rubbish. You could make the same case, I suppose, about career and education. It's like, those are opportunities, man. And they're opportunities to do something significant with your life. And you're going to need to do that because you're going to encounter periods of suffering, intense suffering, when it's difficult for you to make sense out of the logic of existence. And what you'll have in those situations is, if you're fortunate, you'll have the goodwill that you've generated as a consequence of being an upstanding, productive, and generous individual and citizen. And then perhaps you'll have a little arc that can sustain you through the worst storms of your life. And this is something that conservatives really can tell to young people, is you're going to find the sustaining meaning of your life through responsibility. And that is the case. I certainly saw that time and again as a clinical psychologist in all my practice, helping people sort out the desperate chaos of isolated and lonely lives, pointless lives, lives that were expended in futile isolation and in resentful rebelling against the imposition of any responsible order, instead of carrying that forthrightly and understanding how integrally that voluntary commitment is associated with sustaining meaning. And you're going to need it. Mark my words. I think the way you do that, the way you restore the moral authority of your nation, is by restoring your moral authority and your moral authority in relationship to the relationships that you have. Get your act together. You know, your nation is founded on the principle that each person is a sovereign citizen and a creator of the future, and someone who's made in the image of God, someone who wrestles the chaos of possibility into habitable order using love and truth. And the reason you have the rights you have is because those rights are in some sense fundamental consequences of that divine capacity. And you might ask, well, do you believe that? Well, to the degree that you abide by the dictates of your state, and to the degree that you treat other people as if they're worthwhile in and of themselves, then you do believe it. And I would say, well, believe it fully. Act it out. Put yourself together. Don't lie. Pick up your responsibility and move forward as forthrightly as you possibly can. Repair your relationships. And if enough people do that, then America will reestablish the moral authority that's required and requisite. And I don't think there's any other way of doing it. You know, the leftists talk about the long march through the institutions because they tend to be top-down power mongers on the radical left front. And there's a longer march, which is the long march through the individuals. And that's the march that conservatives and centrist liberals need to focus on. Redemption is an individual issue in many regards, even though we have to be nested in our social communities. And it's an individual responsibility. So evaluate your sins and clean them up and sort out your relationships, and then you can expand outward into the civic community and you can have a positive influence there. And there's no other way of doing it that's real. All the rest of it's just facade and treachery. There's a couple of things that I'm doing that are different from what people usually do, you know. So in the last 20 years, the constant message to young people is self-esteem, feel good about yourself. It's like, I don't buy that. I think that you look at yourself in the mirror and you think, Jesus Christ, I could be a hell of a lot better than I am.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there's nothing more complimentary to tell a young person than that. It's like, look at you, you're a wreck. grow the hell up. There's so much more to you than you're manifesting than you can hardly imagine. It's like, well, you think that's a criticism. It's like, no, it's not. It's a great compliment. It's like, look at how much more you could bring out into the world.
Yeah.
Get your aggression under control. Strengthen yourself. Like, take on some responsibility. See if you have enough bloody courage to tell the truth. Put your life together. Stop whining. And the men eat that up because no one's ever told them that, which just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
It's so bad. And, you know, the boys are pulling out of everything. They're pulling out of university. They're pulling out of life. They're pulling out of marriage.
Yeah.
And because of that, they're more awkward and unsophisticated than they would otherwise be, and much more prone to make sexual errors, some of which are, you know, predatory malevolence in the small proportion of cases. But it's another one of those situations, you know, like, imagine that 1 in 100 men are sexual predators.
Yeah.
Probably, maybe it's 1 in 50, but let's go with 1 in 100. Well, that small proportion commit all of the sexual predation. Like, if you look at criminals, it's the Pareto distribution again. 5% of the criminals produce something like, well, the overwhelming majority of the crimes, right? It's a small coterie of specialized people who are responsible for all the criminality. Lots of people are in prison because they did one heinous thing, you know, like they got enraged or drunk and did something violent. But there's the serial criminal types, and they're the ones that like, we had one guy in Toronto, for example, who ran a bike theft ring, and they finally nailed him. And like, there weren't any bikes stolen in Toronto after that. It was just him and his little coterie of, you know, organized bike thieves. And these guys that are being outed, these serial predators, they are responsible. Like, one predatory guy can prey on, who knows, 500 females, 1,000 females in a lifetime, you know? So
it almost seems like, I mean, this is a lot of guys. I was one of these guys who sort of turned away from society for a while, like into computer games and like this slacker identity, which is sort of, I guess it's always been there. Like you turn to like away from all responsibilities and you go to the dream world. But the opportunities to do this is so much larger now.
Well, it's the Lost Boys, like in Peter Pan, right? They're in Neverland and they never grow up. And Peter Pan is their leader. That's the story. And it's not surprising because it's easier to occupy yourself trivially than it is to do something difficult.
What are the top 3 rules for being the best man I can be for the people I love?
Well, you know, rule number 1 is ask that question. That's a good question. You know, that's a meditative and prayerful question. You know, I don't think there's any difference, by the way, between prayer and thought. I think that thought is secularized prayer. I think that's even true, like, evolutionarily and historically. And then the question is, well, what is prayer? And by implication, thought. And that is the opening up of yourself to revelation, and then the critical analysis of the revelation. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, when you think, you admit your ignorance, because why think if you're not ignorant? And you note that you have a problem, and you formalize the problem, which is to ask the question associated with the problem, and then you open yourself up for receipt of an answer. It's really important to get the question right. There's the first rule. Get the question right. That's a pretty good question. That question is, how am I the best father and husband in relationship to those I love? And then that has to be a question. And then you can ask yourself, think, okay, well, you know, how would have I liked my father to have conducted himself? And how did fathers that I knew that I admired conduct themselves? And how did great men in history who would be models for fathers
conduct themselves, and what is the eternal spirit of the redeeming Father? Those are all the same question at different levels of depth. And if you ask yourself that question, you'll stumble towards a revelation of the answer. And then it's incumbent on you to embody that, to act it out. You could ask a different question. What stupid things am I doing that I could stop doing, that I would stop doing, both, that I could stop doing, that I would stop doing, that are interfering with me being that? And man, that's a great question to ask yourself every morning. You know, what stupid thing am I doing that I could quit doing? That I would quit doing? Because those aren't the same thing, right? Because you know there's stupid things that you're doing that you're just not going to quit doing because you like them. But there might be something on the edge there where, weak and useless as you are, you could stop that. And you know, part of the reason I wrote this one rule here, the first book, I think it was, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Well, why did I formulate it like that? It's like, well, you can't tell the truth because, like, what the hell do you know? But some of the things you say are lies, and you know it, and some of the lies that you tell, you could just stop telling. Well, start with that. You know, incremental death and regrowth. Incremental death and rebirth. And you let the lies die, and you let something new emerge instead, right? That's the resurrection. So you let the spirit of deceit perish, and you let the eternal spirit of redemption arise in its place. And that's really good for you, and it's really good for your wife. It'll spice up your sex life like mad, and because she'll actually want to have you around. And that's kind of useful if you're trying to seduce someone, even your wife, who you might think is otherwise obligated, and perhaps she is, but I don't know how much fun that is. Obligatory sex. It's like, that's not a very good idea. And it'll be really good for your kids, and maybe there's enough to you so that it won't just be good for you and your wife and your kids, but maybe it'll be good for your friends, and then maybe for your community, and who knows what would happen if you really got your act together. You know, like there is this weird idea that's central to our culture that because we're all of divine value, that we have the spark of God himself within us. And but we don't allow that to make itself manifest because we lack the courage and the faith. And yeah, I think that's exactly right. And so it's an open question, you know, if you as a father decided you were going to take the bushel off your light, and that'd be great for your kids, you know. And one of the things you got to understand about your kids, this is really worth knowing. Your kids want to have the best relationship with you that they possibly could have. Like they're 100% on board with that idea. Way more than anyone you've ever met in your life. And that means you could have the best relationship with your children that you've ever had with anyone. That's what they offer you. And it's up to you to realize that, and you could. And that's a hell of that's a good opportunity, man. You know, even if you've been beat around a lot and betrayed and hurt, you've got those little kids and they're thinking, what do you want to do, Dad? You know, and if you're bitter, that'll cut you to the quick and you'll hurt them. You don't want to do that. I wrote about this in Notes from Underground. It's a great book, very short book, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. compelling, dark read. It's the confession of a miserable, resentful, like murderously genocidal bureaucrat who evaluates his own soul, I suppose, and confesses his sins. And it's also a critique of the idea of utopia oriented towards security. And Dostoevsky, who was dealing with the set of ideas that are really tearing us apart culturally right now, this idea of a eventual utopia based on something like security and safety. Dostoevsky really objected to that back in this like 1860, a long time ago. He said, you know, the thing about people that you don't really understand is that, he said, fundamentally we're ungrateful and we can curse. That's what distinguished us from the animals, which I thought was pretty damn comical. But he said something very interesting, you know. He said, if you set up a utopia so that all people had to do was eat cakes and busy themselves with the continuation of the species, that, yeah, right, Russian humor, you know, that after a surfeit of that, after enough of that, which would happen quite quickly, people would just go mad just to break things, just so something unexpected and remarkable could happen, and that we're not built for security and safety, but for something, well, let's call it adventure, something like adventure. That's a good thing to know, you know, because you don't want to suffer unduly. That seems reasonable. And you might think, because of that, that really what you want is happiness. But then Solzhenitsyn, for example, he wrote about what happened in the Gulag Archipelago under Stalin and said, you know, if your goal is happiness, what are you going to do when the jackboots hammer down your door at 2 in the morning and haul you off to the prison camp, because you're not going to be happy there. And so, you know, happiness is a boat that's easily capsized and the waves are always there. And so if your philosophy is one of, say, impulsive happiness, same sort of thing Dostoevsky was pointing at, and Kierkegaard, then you're not prepared when all hell breaks loose. And all hell, it will absolutely 100% break through at some point in your life. And you're lucky if it won't be decades. You know, it'll certainly be some of it, and it might be a lot of it. And for some of you, it's going to be damn near the whole thing. And so if what floats your boat is happiness, you're going to be capsized by the first decent wave. And so then you might ask yourself, you know, what do you have instead of happiness that might be even more reliable? And I do think that adventure is more reliable than happiness. And in the Old Testament story of Abraham, founder of the Abrahamic faiths, and obviously what would you call it, a crucial figure in the development of world culture, Abraham is presented as a late bloomer, to say the least. He's like 83. People lived longer back then, at least so the story goes. And he had a very rich father by nomadic standards, and he could just sit around in the tent all day. And, you know, a doting mother and a rich father, he could just sit around in the tent all day and eat peeled grapes and busy himself with the continuation of the species. And but, you know, God appears to him and says, get away, get out of your security, get out of your comfort, leave your family, leave your community, leave your nation, go out into the world. And it's a very interesting story. It's very interesting to contemplate it from both a psychological and a religious perspective, because what God is presented as in that book, which is a crucial book for as I said, for world culture, is God is presented as the manifestation of the Spirit that calls even the too secure and pampered to adventure. Abraham has a pretty rough time when he goes out and has his adventure. It's not all, you know, Skittles and roses from then on in. Quite the contrary. And he runs right away into like a conspiracy of elites to steal his wife. He runs into tyranny, runs into starvation. He encounters war. It's like he goes out in the world and he has the whole tragedy of his life, both on the social and political front and individually, you know. But the promise is the promise of adventure and the
implication is that if you have a sufficient adventure, then that cannot so much protect you from suffering, because perhaps that is impossible, but to justify it. And because you kind of know this in your own life. When you look at your life, you might look back on travails that you've undertaken, you know, and they've done end-of-life surveys with people and asked them what they regret. And, you know, people don't regret what they did that didn't work. They regret what they didn't do that could have worked, you know. They regret the chances they didn't take. And, you know, even if you do an evaluation of your biography, one of the things that you want to be able to say to yourself is something like, maybe there's nothing better you can say to yourself than this. You can think about this for yourself and see if it's true. That was extraordinarily difficult, but it was worth it. And, you know, it's not like you can have one of those without the other, because you can't imagine that you could have some confidence in what you've managed to accomplish, right? The kind of confidence that would instill you with a certain genuine sense of self-regard despite your fundamental inadequacy. To have that fundamental sense of self-regard that's grounded in something real, it has to be based in a narrative that approximates that was extremely difficult, but it was worth it. You have to have both of those. And so that's interesting, because one of the questions we always ask ourselves, this is the theodicy question, technically. You see the suffering in the world, you see the suffering of children, you see maybe your own children or your suffering, and you wonder, well, how can reality be constituted so that I can have faith in its essence when there is so much suffering? And one answer to that is something like, well, how much suffering do you want? And you might think, none. It's like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that's right. You want, at least you want something approximating optimized challenge. So you could say, at least you want to be pushed to your limit. And maybe you find the most exciting times in your life, in fact, you'll pay for this, you'll pay to have this experience, to be pushed to your limit, like not beyond it, or maybe even a bit beyond it, you know? And maybe not so far beyond it that you crumble and break and things fall apart, but, you know, could you be pushed to your limit optimally if there wasn't the possibility of falling apart and breaking? Like, that's an open question. How are you ever going to take something seriously if the consequences aren't actually serious? You know, and there's something delightful about dancing on the edge. That's why Hawaiians believed that surfing was sacred, you know, and it's because to surf you have to be on the edge, right? And the waves can come and take you out at any moment, but without the possibility of the waves rising to take you out, then you can't dance on the edge, and maybe that's exactly what you want to do, you know. And there's good evidence from the neuroscience literature that consciousness itself is something akin to dancing on the edge. So technically, when you're conscious, when you're awake, your brain is occupying a position between something. It's a position that's something like between chaos and order. And if your brain's maximally ordered, well, you're just bored and nothing is changing. And if you're chaotic, then it's anxiety and catastrophe. But you want to be positioned right between those two, and that's when your consciousness is optimized, you know. And when your consciousness is optimized, then you're deeply engaged in life, and everything seems alive and meaningful. And maybe that's the solution in some profound sense to the problem of suffering. It's that you optimize your interaction with chaos rather than being protected all the time from everything that could hurt you. You kind of know this too if you have kids, because you don't want to keep your kids in an infantile state, and because when they're infants, pretty much what you do with them, say they're 6 months and younger, is you just keep them secure and safe, right? You just provide everything that you can for them. You have to do that because, well, what are they going to do? They just lay there fundamentally and squawk now and then. I mean, it's not like they're ambulatory. They can't go out and do things for themselves, and so it's up to you, and your goal is to keep them secure and safe. But once they start being able to move around, then increasingly it's sort of up to them. And if you have any sense as a parent, the psychoanalysts used to say, the good mother necessarily fails. And what did they mean by that? They meant, well, you know, if you're committed to your infant when you're a mother for the first 6 months, it's like it's all the kid, 100%, full self-sacrifice devoted towards the infant. That's the right attitude. But even by 9 months, child can crawl around quite a lot, they're developing something of an independent will, you start handing them challenges. You start handing them responsibility, and you keep them on the edge. And some of your kids are going to be able to be pushed harder than others, and part of the reason you have to develop a relationship with your kids, and your husband for that matter, is so that, you know, you can keep them dancing on the edge, on the proper edge. And that's even better than the mere provision of security. Faith is a presupposition for living in the truth. And then you might ask yourself another question, which is, well, why bother living in the truth? Well, one answer would be so that reality doesn't rise up and smite you repeatedly, which it will, if you're deceptive. So that's one answer, but here's another answer, and this is a better answer. People ask themselves all the time, what's the purpose of life? And there's a variety of answers to that. There's no purpose. We're just atoms on a dust mote at the edge of a rather reprehensible corner of the cosmos, and we exist for a moment and we're out, and that's that. Or we're so lost in a plethora of subordinate meanings that we're confused and aimless. Or we want to be hedonistically happy, and I would say that's really the offer that's on the table in our culture most of the time. It's like, well, I just want to be happy. And people will say that to you. It's a slogan. It's the most common slogan of our time, I would say, and it's such a preposterous slogan. It's like, what do you mean just? You just want to be happy. That's all. That's all you want. That absolute impossibility. You want bliss unending no matter what you do, and that's all you want. It's not exactly a small ask, let's say, because it's the same thing as asking to dwell permanently in paradise. It's something like that. So it's not that likely. And then it also isn't true. That isn't what you want. If you do careful analysis of what people mean when they say they just want to be happy, what they mean is they don't want to suffer stupidly. We're much more concerned with not experiencing an excess of negative emotion than we are with experiencing a surfeit of positive pleasure. So first of all, we don't mean we just want to be happy. We mean, please don't make us too miserable. And fair enough, that's reasonable. But then even on the happiness front, even on the absence of misery front, that's not true. One of the things Dostoevsky pointed out in Notes from Underground, which is so bloody brilliant, he was criticizing the idea of materialist utopia. He said something like, well, imagine we made our materialist utopian dreams come true, and everybody had enough to eat all the cakes they wanted and enough to drink, and nothing to do, he said, but busy themselves with the continuation of the species. And we were so pleased that we emitted nothing but bubbles of bliss. He said human beings were so damn ungrateful that the first thing we do is take a stick and smash up all that comfortable prosperity just so that something unexpected and provocative could happen. And that's very smart, you know, that's hearkening in some sense back to the story of the Garden of Eden and the proclivity of human beings to eat the forbidden fruit. It's like it isn't obvious at all that we want happiness. It isn't even obvious that we want absence of misery. What's really obvious is that we want an adventure. We want an adventure that's so compelling that it makes the misery of life not just justifiable, but worthwhile. You want to look back on your life, you know. You want to look back on your life, and you know this to be true. You want to be able to say to yourself, even considering a month or a week or a series of days, you want to be able to say, that was really difficult, but you know what? It was worth it.
And I think that's what you want from your life. It's something like, you know what, that was difficult, but it was worth it. And that meant that the adventure was so great that it justified the difficulties. And so then the question is, and here's the question, where do you find the great adventure of your life? Well, how about in truth? Well, why? Because you don't know what's going to happen if you tell the truth. It's a mystery. It's going to lay itself out for you. And so that's an adventure, because you literally do not know what's going to happen. You have to let go of knowing what's going to happen. And so then you have that adventure, and then what is also the case is that it's you that's having the adventure. Right? Because if what you're doing is living in truth, that's you, that truth is you. And so that means that whatever happens when you tell the truth is your adventure. And then you think, well, I'm using deception. It's like, well, maybe you are, but maybe deception is using you. And then maybe it's the spirit of deception that's having the adventure of your life. And then you might ask yourself, well, why are you so miserable and unhappy? And the answer would be, well, the spirit of deception is having the adventure of your life. You're not even there. Because if you're not living in truth, you're not there. Obviously, what's there is the spirit of deception. And you might think that's your deception, but I would be very careful about thinking that, because there have been centuries of meditation on the nature of the spirit of deception. And the answer isn't that the spirit of deception is you. The answer is that the spirit of deception is something that possesses you and convinces you that it's you. And that's not something you want to fall into the clutches of. So now you have to tell me the question again.
I'm certain you answered it. This was about teenagers.
Oh, yes. Well, back to the teenagers. Do you not want to go to college, or are you just lying about being lazy? So that's a question, and we can ask ourselves that question. And as I said, on the teenage front, craft a vision, craft a compelling vision. That's really what we are as human beings, is we're visionaries. That's how we confront the horizon of the future. We meet the horizon of the future by crafting a compelling vision. And your vision might not involve a college education, but it should be a vision that makes you think, if I could make that come true, it would justify the trouble that it would take to manage it. And I think that's the right attitude to take towards your life. And we're all going to have our crosses to bear in the most fundamental manner. We all have to deal with the catastrophe of mortality. And I think we all have to deal with the reality of hell. And you can think about that religiously or not. Political hell will do for hell as far as I'm concerned. We certainly saw no shortage of evidence for that in the 20th century. And we all have to contend with that, right? The reality of mortality and the reality of hell. And then we all have to contend with the fact that we have to develop a vision for our life that is so compelling that it justifies those bitter realities. God calls people to the adventure of their lives. And so you could say, in part, God is that force within you which calls you to the adventure of your life. And it says, get away from your family, get away from your blind and unconscious comfort, and get the hell out there in the world. Well, God calls Abraham out from his fathers, where he stayed far too long, and from his kin, where it's secure. And the first thing he encounters is a famine, and then he encounters a tyranny inhabited by people who want to steal his wife. It's like you think, well, Abraham should have just stayed in bed and ignored God, obviously. Well, that isn't how it is. It's like we're built for struggle, us human beings. You're not after the bubbles of bliss that Dostoevsky described in Notes from Underground. We're built to contend with the world. We're built to contend with reality. You want a challenge, and the best way that you can take on a challenge, because a challenge fortifies you. So you don't want to be secure, you want to be strong.
and you get strong by taking on optimal challenges. And so you lay out your destiny in the world, and you take the slings and arrows of fate, and you make yourself stronger while you're doing so. And you might fail, and fortune might do you in, but it's your best bet.
That is St. George. And St. George is killing a dragon here, which is what St. George is always doing. And he's rescuing this princess, which is, maybe he's not too thrilled about that because he was expecting a big pile of gold, but turns out that if you have gold, you can get princesses, so it's basically the same thing. Actually, it turns out if you know how to get gold, you can get princesses, because princesses aren't that stupid, and you can fool them with gold, but if you force them to make a choice, they'll go for the guy who knows how to get the gold instead of the guy that has the gold and doesn't know how to get it. And that's because our tree-dwelling ancestresses were very happy when the first of our tree-dwelling ancestors figure out how to drop a really big stick on a really ugly predatory snake. And that happened a long, long, long time ago, like 60 million years. And so this is a really old story. And here's the story. The story is something like, well, when you're out there doing things, sometimes that doesn't work. And when you're where what you're doing is working, you're in one place. And when you're where what you're doing isn't working, you're in another place. And the place you are when where you're doing isn't working is a chaotic state. And the chaotic state is the state that surrounds what you know, in a sense, and that's where all the predators are, fundamentally. That's when you've accidentally wandered out of your safe territory, and that's where the predators lurk. And the system that we use to conceptualize the things that lurk outside our conceptual system is the same system that our ancestors used to detect predators. So we're abstract creatures, and so we think of prey, predator, but then you could think of conception, anomaly, and it's the same idea. And that's why here's a very loose association, but the snake in the Garden of Eden is a predator because it's a snake, but it's also the thing that always pokes its ugly head up in the middle of your paradises. And there's just no getting away from that. And then the question is, well, what should you do with snakes of life? And one answer is you should scream and run, or you should freeze, which is what a rabbit would do. But it turns out that if you don't do either of those, if you approach the anomalous thing, then you get the treasure that it guards. And I love this image. It's so intelligent because what it says is that, well, if you face the chaotic expanse of life, then that makes you the sort of creature that appeals to potential mates. And there is absolutely no doubt that that's the case, because one of the things we know, for example, about women is they mate up and across and up dominance hierarchies. They like the dominant guys. Women are choosy maters. Chimpanzee females, by the way, aren't. So then the question is, who's the most dominant male? Well, you know, maybe he's the guy with the biggest sword, or maybe he's the football player, and that's a possibility too. But there's the guy who wins the game, and he's pretty dominant, and then there's the guy who wins the game of games, and he's so much more dominant than the guy that wins the games that they're not even in the same universe. And women, because you can't fool them because they're quite smart, if they have the opportunity, will always pick the guy who wins the game of games over the guy that wins the game.
How do you find, on that topic, the love of your life?
That's a good question. I was asked that multiple times on my tour, 3 times in a row, in fact, because we asked people to use this Slido gadget.
That's a popular question.
It always came up to the top. And I got asked that 3 times in a row, and I didn't have a good answer. And then I thought, why don't I have a good answer? I thought, oh, I know why. Because that's a stupid question. So why?
Yeah.
Why? Because it's putting the cart before the horse. Here's the right question. How do I make myself into the perfect date? You answer that question, and you will not have any problem answering the previous question. It's like, what do I want in a partner?
if I offered everything I could to a partner, who would I be? You work on that. Ask that question. Just ask yourself, okay, I have to be the person that women would want. Okay, what do they want? Clean, that's not a bad start. Reasonably good physical shape. So healthy, productive, generous, honest, willing to delay gratification. So you dance with a woman. It's like, what's she doing? What are you two doing? Well, it's a pattern. There's patterns happening around you. That's the music. Patterns of being. That's the music. Now, can you align yourself with the patterns of being gracefully? That's what she's checking out. And then can you do that with her? And then can you do that in a playful and attentive manner and keep your bloody hands to yourself for at least a minute? And so, can you dance in a playful manner? It's like you can go through this in your imagination and you'll know. And then you think, well, how far am I from those things? And the answer is usually, man, it's a pretty horrible abyss separating you from that ideal. But the harder you work on offering other people what they need and want, the more people will line up to play with you. And so it's the wrong question. It's like, how can I be the best partner possible? And then you think, well, if I do that, people will just take advantage of me. And that's the non-naive objection, right? Because the naive person thinks, well, I'll be good and everyone will treat me right. It's like the cynic says, no, I'll be good and someone will take me out. And then you think, well, what do you do about that objection? And the answer is, well, you factor that in. And that's why you're supposed to be, what is it? As soft as a dove and as wise as a serpent. It's like, I know you're full of snakes. I know it. Maybe I know it more than you do. But we'll play anyways. And
Take the risk anyway.
That's right. Voluntarily, right? It's like, and what's so cool about that is that even though the person you're dealing with is full of snakes, if you offer your hand in trust and it's real, you will evoke the best in them. I don't believe that women do have a tendency to prefer bad men higher in dark triad traits. They may have a tendency to be more erotically attracted to men who are capable of manifesting dominance and aggression. I think the evidence for that is relatively clear. And I don't think the Bible at all describes a mode of being as associated with nice guy traits. I don't know. That may be how it's classically taught, for example, because Christ is often presented, especially in more simple-minded variants, and I'm not being pejorative about that precisely, as the ultimate in nice guys, but I don't think that that's true at all. That's a reasonable characterization at all if you read the gospel accounts, because he was someone who was certainly capable of saying very, very harsh things to people and was also identified very strongly as a figure who was capable of using judgment and distinguishing between what was positive and what was negative. And that capacity for judgment is something quite different than the mere nice guy compassion that would be associated with high levels of trait agreeableness. So I think that the idea that the ideal that's put forward in the biblical writings is something like be harmless, I think that's a real misreading of the text. And I also think that it's wrong, because harmless and good are not the same thing at all. And in fact, I think one of the best ways of characterizing like a higher order morality, and this is something that Nietzsche talked about a fair bit, is that, and Jung as well, with regards to the idea of integration of the shadow, is that someone who's moral has the capability for violence and the capability for aggression built in and at hand, but is also someone who's perfectly capable of controlling that in a civilized manner. And I think that, I'm speaking off the cuff here, obviously, but I think that the attraction that some women have for the sort of men who are more likely to misbehave, to act in a delinquent manner and so forth, is partly their desire to be associated with men who have the capacity for aggression. There's more to us than there is to the horror. As nature is, bent on our destruction, bad as culture is, tyrannical and bloody, back as far as you can look, as malevolent as you are in the darkest part of your heart, and that's plenty malevolent, the possibility that's within you that can well up, the courage and the truth and the ability and the skill and the willingness to set things right, if you are willing to set them right, is more powerful than all of that. And so it's so interesting. It was proof for me of an old saying I read from Carl Jung. It's an alchemical motif, instir qualinus inventur, which is what you most want to be found will be found where you least want to look, essentially. And it's so interesting because it means that if you're willing to turn around and to stand up straight and face the darkness like fully, what you discover at the darkest part is the brightest light. And that's something that's so much worth discovering, because there's going to be terrible darkness in your life. And it's going to make you cynical and bitter. And it could easily be that you're just not looking at it enough. Because if you looked at it enough and you didn't shy away and you brought everything you had to bear on it, you'd find that there was more to you than there was to the horror. You know, I watched my father-in-law. I'll end with this. And you know, you don't know, because you're not bringing your A game to the table with all that cynicism and bitterness and resentment and willful blindness and avoidance. Maybe you're playing at 60%. It's not good enough, because there's too much of what's bad for 60% to be good enough. It's like you need 90% or 95% or 100%. When about 15, 20 years ago, my mother-in-law developed frontal temporal dementia, which I wouldn't recommend. You know, it's one of those degenerative neurological diseases like Alzheimer's, and those bloody things are like they're in the top echelon of awful. You know, you watch a person deteriorate before your eyes. It's a lengthy, lengthy death. And it was slow. And her husband, he lived in this little town that I grew up in, about 3,000 people. And he was quite a character, man. Everybody knew him. I bought him a Foghorn Leghorn t-shirt once, because that's kind of what he was like. He was loud and sort of bombastic, but he stood up straight, I can tell you. And he played the fool a little bit, mostly for the amusement of people, but he was no damn fool. And I always admired him and liked him. And the feeling was mutual, thank God, since I married his daughter. And, you know, he drank a lot with his crazy friends up in northern Alberta, and he wasn't at home a lot because he was working a lot. And you know, he was kind of a party animal about town, but a good businessman and a good man. And then his wife got sick, and they moved to another town. And, you know, he took care of her for like 15 years. It was unbelievable as she deteriorated, you know, and she got more desperate to have him around, and her love for him never went away. Even as she lost herself almost completely, she would always light up when he came into the room, you know. And he took care of her right till within weeks of her death. He had to finally put her in an old folks' home because he was no longer strong enough to lift her up from the chair. And we interacted with him a lot, you know, because we were trying to help him figure out how to cope. And we had signs put up in the house, electronic signs that would tell her when he was leaving, so that she would know where he went. And we had recordings in the bathroom so that she knew what to do when she went into the bathroom. And we tried to do everything we could to not make this absolutely bloody, atrocious experience complete hell. And he participated the whole way, you know, and it was really something to see. It was really it left me with a tremendous sense of admiration for him, but not just for him, but for people who can do that, you know. And if there was a new decline, he took it on, and he didn't complain about it, and he tried to do what he could, you know. And like, it was no picnic, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't hell. And then we were all gathered around the deathbed, my wife's mother's deathbed, and the family was there, and they got along pretty well, you know. And her sister's a palliative care nurse, and the other one's a pharmacist, and none of them are particularly afraid of illness and death. You know, they're a pretty tough group. And so, you know, they made sure their mother's lips were wet while she was no longer eating or drinking, and tried to make her comfortable. And they're around the deathbed, and they were kind of getting along, you know. It wasn't Family Feud at mother's death time, and that was kind of nice. And she died, and that was that. But it wasn't just that, because the fact that the family had coped with it well and nobly and honorably, I would say, brought them together. They were closer afterwards than they were before. And they all had more respect for their father. And then in the old folks' home, he met another woman who had a husband there who had Alzheimer's, and they got to know each other, you know, and he died after a while, and she died after a while, and then a few months later they started going out, and then eventually they had a relationship, and now they live together. And so he gained something. Like, it wasn't that he replaced what he lost, you know what I mean? Because he still has pictures of his wife up in his house, and she was the love of his life, and that's not going away. But, you know, his family respected him more, and everybody pulled together more, and it wasn't hell at the deathbed, it was just tragedy, and the family pulled together more. And that was a good example of how you can extract at least a certain amount of light out of what's dark, even at a personal level. And it's worth asking yourself. It's like, drop what you're doing that's foolish, that you know is foolish, and pick an aim that's worthwhile, you know, to make things better for yourself, like you're worth taking care of, like you're worth something, you know, and to surround yourself with people who believe the same, and who are rejoicing in your accomplishments and unhappy when you fail, right? And you're comparing yourself to your accomplishments of yesterday and not to someone else's today, so that you're not jealous and bitter. And you put your own house in order so that you're not cursing the world when some of its disarray might be your fault. And you're trying to pursue something meaningful, and you're doing your best to tell the truth, and all of that. And then you see what happens. Who the hell are you? You know, you think you're a miracle of some bloody bizarre sort. We've been around for 3.5 billion years. You know, every single one of your relatives propagated successfully. And here you are, against all possible odds, in this world of hell in some sense, and bitterness and tyranny and malevolence. And yet, God only knows what's inside you, this capacity for consciousness, the capacity to confront potential and to turn it into something good. That's us, man. That's the Western story. That's the individual as the cornerstone of the state. That's our responsibility, and it really is who we are. And so we need to know that, and we need to remember it, and we need to act it out. And then maybe we can see what we can do about it, you know, and see how good we could make things. And maybe that would be the purpose of your damn life, right? Not to be happy. It's like, there's problems to be solved. Be happy after you solve the goddamn things, right? So I learned, because I looked at dark things, that I learned that the light was more powerful than the darkness as far as that I was concerned, and that people were capable, each of us, of remarkable things, and that we need to know that that's what we are. We're this consciousness that confronts potential with all its catastrophe. That's what we are. That's what makes us in the image of God. That's what gives us our intrinsic value. And that idea that we have intrinsic value, that's the bedrock presupposition of our state. We're going to question that, or we're going to live it out. Better to live it out. Find out who you are. Thank you very much.